Alright, let's talk about some little security and validation right here. Let's say user tries to create a to-do and he doesn't put in anything, right? So if we come right here to the application and we just hit enter, we can see that it created a record into our database with no text, which means we are not even checking if the user actually put in something. We're just allowing the user to submit the form, and that's really bad for a real-world application, right? So what we're going to do in this video is actually take care of validating the user's data before persisting it into the database. Now head over to the documentation and you're going to see that we have this validator that Adonis provides for us. Behind the scenes, Adonis uses Indicative, which is one of my favorite promise-based validation libraries, and you should have a look before you actually follow along. So to install this, we just need to run Adonis install Adonis.js validator, and this is actually an Adonis.js package, which means it's specific to the Adonis.js framework, and it's gonna add some functionality to our application. Now, once that's installed, automatically it should go ahead and open such a file in your browser, and this is instructions that you can use to install this package into your application. Now, this is one of the advantages of using Adonis install. If you're using npm install, you just install that package, right? But if you're using Adonis install, it can actually listen to what type of package and then generate documentation for it and some other cool stuff like that. So to register this application, we need to go to our start app.js and paste in this line of code. And I'm going to tell you exactly what that is. In our start directory, then we have the app.js and we have a providers array right here. So we just need to paste this in with the others. Now look at these providers. We have an app provider, a view provider, a Lucid provider, body parser provider, course provider, and all those good stuff. Now what does this do? Adonis.js is divided into service providers. So for each functionality, it's separated into a provider so that you can either pull it out or allow it in your application. This is really great for separation of concerns. For example, right now, if your application had nothing to do with validation, then you wouldn't need the validator provider in your application. But right now we need it, so we are installing the service provider in charge of validation, and that's gonna automatically bring the validation functionality into our application, right? So we're going to talk more about service providers, but for now, it just adds functionality into application. So once we're done registering that, that's all we need to do. I'm going to close this off and then we're going to focus on application for now. If I head over to my to-dos controller, we're going to use the validation package. So we're going to create a variable called validator, and this is going to be equal to use validator. And like we said, in Adonis, this validator is simply an alias to the real package, right? So once we just use validator, Adonis will automatically fetch that package and give it to us. That's the reason for this use function, okay? So now we can get the validator package. What we actually want is a validate all function that is inside that package, okay? So we destructure it and get it right there. Now, in application, before we save, we are going to want to validate the data coming in, okay? And this data is our body right here, okay? So how does this validator work? It takes in the data and it also takes in some rules that we want to use to validate that data, okay? So I'm going to create a rules object and I'm going to create a rule for text, and I'm going to say that the text is required before persisting into the database, okay? Then I'm going to create a new validator, and this is going to be equals to await validate all, and the validate all function takes in the data we want to validate and it takes in the rules we want to use to validate that data, okay? So it would use these rules to go through the data and cross-check. For example, this body has a text property, right? So it's going to make sure that the text is actually found in the data using this rule that says text is required. So how do we get the results? We can say if validator.fails, then what do we want to do? For now, we're just going to return a response redirect back, and we're going to console.log validator.messages. Okay, so this validate all function validates the data, and if there are any failures, then this fails function is going to return a true to us, and this if statement is going to be executed. And for us to get the validation failure messages, we can call the messages function on the validator and you give that to us. Then we'll just redirect the user back. Okay, so let's head over to our view and try to submit that form again. If we hit enter, it redirects back. But let's check our console right now where our application is running. You can see that we have an array right here. And this array says that the field text has a validation of required and the message is required validation failed on text. Okay, what if I pass in a pipe right here and I'm gonna say min of 8 characters? Okay, so that's to say that the text must actually be a minimum of 8 characters. So I'll head over back to my browser and I'm gonna put in 3 characters, hit enter, it's refreshed. If we look right now, we see that we have a new error and it says the validation is min and it says min validation failed on text. Awesome. How about customizing those messages that we actually receive? We're gonna create a new messages object, and in this object we're gonna specify that if we have a text.required error, the message should be please provide a to-do. Okay, and we're also gonna specify that if we have a text.min error, which means the minimum characters were not met, then we're gonna say your to-do is not long enough, okay, or whatever message you want to pass. And then we're gonna pass this messages object as the third parameter into the validator function. Okay, so right now we'll visit the application, hit enter, it refreshes. If we check our console, we can see that there's a brand new message there that says please provide a to-do. Okay, if we go back to our application and paste in 1 2 3 right now, hit enter, it submits the request. If we go back to our console, we have a message that says your to-do is not long enough, and this looks better than min validation failed on text or required validation failed on text. Alright, so we're able to actually validate our data to make sure that what is getting into the database is valid, right? But how about displaying this data to the user so that the user should know what happened? Okay, the user should not just stay in the blank. He should know that, okay, the to-do was not created and this is the reason why. Let's tackle that in the very next lesson.